I didn't yell when my son drove off. I didn't chase the truck. I didn't even call his name twice. I just stood there in the Arizona desert, watching the dust fall back to the ground like it had been waiting for this. He leaned out the window, smile flat and practiced, and said, "Let's see if you survive this." One bottle of water, no map, no signal. He didn't leave me out there because he hated me. He left me because he wanted what I built my company, my land, my name without the inconvenience of me still breathing. The desert would erase the evidence. Time would do the rest. But he missed one thing. I spent years building things that don't collapse. And I learned a long time ago how to disappear without dying. So when he finally came home, ready to wear his grief like a suit and take my life apart piece by piece, I was already there, waiting, and I smiled like I'd been expecting him. The trip that was supposed to heal. I said yes, because hope is stubborn in fathers even when it should know better. My son called on a Thursday morning, cheerful in a way that felt rehearsed. He said we'd been tense. He said we needed time together. He said the desert had always cleared my head, and he wanted one last trip, just us. No business talk, no lawyers, no old arguments. He knew exactly which words still worked on me. I packed light. One change of clothes, a small first aid kit, and the old brass compass I'd carried since my Navy days. It wasn't superstition, it was habit. The compass had never lied to me, even when people did. On the drive, Ryan handled everything. The rental, the route, the stops. He kept his phone face down in the cup holder like the screen might betray him if it caught the sun. When it buzzed, he'd smile and say, "Just a friend checking in." He talked about fresh starts while his hands stayed tense on the wheel. At the campsite, he made a small fire like he'd practiced. He offered me water like it was kindness, then watched how much I drank. The desert air smelled like dust and hot stone, and the silence felt too clean, like a room that had been emptied on purpose. That night, he asked a question he never used to ask. "Dad, you trust me, right?" I nodded, because fathers do. But inside, something cold clicked into place. The details that didn't feel right. The desert didn't make me uneasy. How prepared my son was did. Morning came sharp and bright, the kind of light that shows you everything you've been pretending not to see. Ryan was already awake, boots on, moving with purpose. He checked the cooler, counted bottles, and slid 2 into his bag before handing me one. "Just one." He said it casually, like it was nothing. "We won't be long," he added. He suggested a short walk to stretch our legs. No packs, no map. He said the area was safe. He said he'd been here before, as if familiarity were proof of care. While we walked, he kept a half step ahead of me, setting the pace without asking. When I slowed, he slowed. When I stopped, he stopped. Always watching. Always measuring. His phone buzzed once. He flipped it face down immediately. I asked who it was. "Just a friend," he said, too quickly. The trail wasn't a trail at all. No markers, no sign of traffic. Just hard-packed sand and rock that all looked the same after a few minutes. I noticed the sun climbing, the way heat pooled at ankle height, the way the wind erased our footprints behind us. The compass in my pocket felt warm, heavier than usual. Ryan stopped and turned, squinting like he was trying to remember something. "I left something in the truck," he said. "Be right back." He handed me the bottle, watched me take a sip, then nodded, satisfied, and walked away without urgency. No glance over his shoulder, no joke, no reassurance. I stood there alone, listening to his footsteps fade. That was when the pattern completed itself. This wasn't poor planning. It was control. When the engine didn't come back, at first I waited because fathers always believe there's still a reason. I told myself he'd be back in a minute. I stood where he left me, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, listening to the desert breathe. The wind moved low across the sand, whispering over stones like it was tidying up. I checked my watch. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Still nothing. No engine turning over. No deer slamming. No dust rising in the distance. I took another sip from the bottle, smaller this time. The water was already warm. I capped it tightly, not because I was disciplined yet, but because something inside me had started doing quiet math. 15 minutes. I walked a few steps in the direction he'd gone, then stopped. There was no point rushing. If he was coming back, I didn't need to chase him. If he wasn't, running would only waste what I couldn't afford to lose. I called his name once. Just once. Ryan. The sound fell flat, swallowed immediately. The desert doesn't echo. It never sends anything back. That's when the thought finally finished forming, clean and complete. He wasn't delayed. He wasn't lost. He wasn't coming back. I stood there longer than I should have, because acceptance feels a lot like standing still. My mind tried to bargain. Maybe he meant to scare me. Maybe this was some twisted lesson. Maybe he'd circle back once he proved a point. Then the sun climbed higher, and the ground under my boots began to radiate heat. Fear arrived late, but clarity arrived first. This wasn't a mistake. This was a decision. Silence that meant death. The desert doesn't threaten you, it simply removes every option you thought you had. Once the engine failed to return, the silence changed shape. It wasn't empty anymore. It was deliberate. The heat pressed down slowly, not dramatic, not urgent, just patient. I stopped moving and forced myself to think. Because panic burns water faster than thirst ever could, the bottle in my hand felt lighter than it should have. I tilted it, listening to the slosh, measuring what remained by sound alone. There was no shade worth trusting. Rocks radiated heat like they were storing it for later. The horizon wavered, bending distance until direction felt like a rumor. I turned in a slow circle, scanning for anything I could anchor myself to. Nothing. Just sand, stone, and a sky that didn't care. That's when I understood something cruelly precise. He hadn't just left me somewhere remote. He'd left me somewhere final. No road noise. No contrails overhead. No sign that anyone passed through here by accident. If I collapsed, the desert wouldn't record it. If I died, it would look like nature, not intent. I crouched low, pressing my palm into the ground. The sand was already hot enough to sting. My breathing slowed as I forced my thoughts into order. Survival wasn't about strength now. It was about refusal. Refusing to rush. Refusing to curse. Refusing to give the place what it wanted too quickly. I took one small sip and sealed the bottle again. Then a colder thought surfaced, heavier than the heat. If he'd planned this well, he'd planned what came after, realizing this wasn't an accident. That was the moment I stopped asking why and started asking what he wanted. As the hours stretched, the truth sharpened. Not all at once, not dramatically, piece by piece. I replayed the weeks before the trip, the questions he'd asked too casually, about my accounts, about paperwork, about what would happen if something ever happened to me. At the time, I'd answered like a father, explaining the world to a curious son. Standing alone in the desert, I heard those conversations differently. This wasn't rage. It wasn't impulsive cruelty. It was preparation. He had chosen the place carefully, far enough from roads that help wouldn't wander by, close enough that he could leave and be back before anyone noticed I was missing. He'd rationed water not to help me, but to decide how long I'd last. That's when something inside me went quiet. I stopped calling him my son in my thoughts. Not out of anger, out of accuracy. Men who act in anger leave messes. Men who plan leave nothing behind. I checked the compass, not because I needed direction yet, but because I needed to feel something that still obeyed rules. The needle steadied in my palm, pointing north without hesitation. It didn't care who betrayed whom. It didn't care about blood. It only told the truth. I adjusted my pack and stood slowly, conserving energy. Panic would waste time. Grief would waste air. I didn't have either to spare. One thought anchored itself and refused to move. If he wanted me gone, he wanted what came after my disappearance even more. And that meant I wasn't finished yet. Old discipline, new purpose. Fear wastes energy. Discipline keeps you alive. Once the truth settled, I stopped arguing with it. I didn't curse him. I didn't shout at the sky. I didn't move unless I knew why I was moving. The desert doesn't reward effort. It rewards restraint. I sat with my back against a low rock and waited for my heart to slow. Panic feels productive, but it isn't. It just burns what you can't replace. I loosened my boots to keep my feet from swelling and wrapped my shirt around my head to trap what little moisture I could. Small things matter when everything else is gone. I checked the compass again. North. Always north. The needle didn't tremble, even when my hands did. That steadiness gave me something to borrow. I planned in segments, not miles. Walk a little. Rest longer. Move only when the sun allowed it. I took another sip, just enough to wet my mouth, and sealed the bottle tight. Every swallow had to earn its place. As I moved, memories surfaced uninvited. Years of teaching my son that problems could be solved with money, that consequences could be delayed, that someone else would always clean up the mess. I'd called it love. Standing there, measuring shade like currency, I finally named it correctly. It was protection without limits. And limits are what keep things alive. I adjusted my pace and felt something shift inside me, not anger, not fear, but purpose. Survival alone wasn't enough anymore. I needed to stay alive long enough to make sure this ended where it started. With the truth. Saved by strangers. The hands that pulled me back weren't family, they were just human. I was resting in the thin shadow of a rock when I heard it. Not loud, not close, just wrong for a place like this. An engine. First, I thought my mind was betraying me. The desert does that when heat and thirst start negotiating with memory. I stayed still and listened again. The sound returned steady this time, unmistakably real. A pickup truck crested a low rise and slowed when it saw me. Dust curled behind it like a question mark. The driver didn't shout. He didn't wave. He just stopped, stepped out, and looked at me the way people look at something they weren't expecting to find but won't turn away from. "You all right?" he asked. I nodded once. Talking felt expensive. They gave me water carefully, the way you give something fragile back to itself. Small sips. Long pauses. The cold burned my throat in the best way possible. I didn't cry. Relief doesn't always look like that. His wife pressed a damp cloth to my neck and told me to breathe slow. No questions, no judgment, just presence. As we drove away from the place my son had chosen for me, I stared out the window at the desert rolling past, indifferent as ever. It hadn't finished me. It had simply waited to see if I would. That was when the bitterness arrived, not sharp, but heavy. Strangers had saved me without knowing my name. My own blood had left me without looking back. I closed my eyes and let the truck carry me toward shade, water, and something colder than anger. Clarity. Declared dead while breathing. I learned I was dead while I was still drinking water. They drove me to their home first, not a hospital. Shade mattered more than machines. Cold water, salt, time. The woman told me her name once, slowly, like I might need it later. I remember nodding, even though my head felt like it was floating just above my shoulders. It was her husband who brought the paper in from the porch. He didn't say anything at first, just set it on the table between us, smoothed it flat with 2 fingers, and stepped back. The headline used my name in the past tense. Deceased. Local man. Desert incident. Authorities notified. I stared at it longer than I should have, reading every word like it might rearrange itself if I waited. It didn't. The date was today. The time was hours ago. We had moved fast. Too fast. I wasn't missing. I wasn't being searched for. I had already been explained away. The woman covered her mouth softly, like she was afraid to make the moment louder. The man looked out the window, jaw set, the way people do when they realize kindness has just walked into something criminal. "That your family?" he asked. I nodded once. My chest felt tight, not from fear, but from something colder. Precision. This wasn't a lie meant to delay questions. It was a lie meant to end them. I folded the paper carefully and set it aside. If he had already buried me in public, then whatever he planned next didn't require my consent or my existence. And for the first time since the truck disappeared into the dust, I understood the full shape of it. He didn't just want me gone. He wanted me erased, choosing not to come back yet. I realized the worst thing I could do was show up alive too soon. The couple offered to call the authorities right away. It was the natural response. The right one, maybe. But I asked for time instead. Not much, just enough to think while my head was clear and my hands had stopped shaking. If I walked back into my life immediately, I would look like a problem that needed explaining. If I stayed quiet, I became a fact that couldn't be argued with later. People rush when they think the danger has passed. My son would rush now. I borrowed a phone and listened to my own voicemail. Messages from business contacts, confused and cautious. One from a distant relative already using the past tense. No urgency. No search parties. Just acceptance settling in. That told me everything. I called my lawyer next. I didn't explain the desert. I didn't explain the betrayal. I just said one sentence. I'm alive, and someone is pretending I'm not. Silence on the other end, then focus. She told me not to go home. Not yet. She told me paperwork leaves footprints, and people who think they've won stop watching where they step. I stayed where I was. Rested. Drank water. Let my body recover while my name traveled without me. Every hour I remained unseen was an hour he grew more comfortable in a world without my shadow. Comfort makes people careless, and careless people leave evidence. I looked at the folded paper again, the announcement of my death, and felt something steady settle in my chest. Not rage, not sorrow. Leverage. For the first time since the engine disappeared into the desert, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. The first legal cracks. The law saw what emotion never could. Patterns don't panic. My lawyer didn't raise her voice. She didn't gasp. She didn't ask how I'd survived. She asked for dates, times, names. Calm questions with sharp edges. That's how I knew she understood. Within an hour, she called back with the first fracture in his story. A document filed that morning, authority transferred temporarily in the event of death. Clean language, careful wording, too careful. It assumed I wouldn't be there to disagree. She told me not to confront him. Not yet. Confrontation warns people. Paperwork traps them. Banks had already been notified. Accounts flagged. A request submitted to release control pending verification. He'd moved fast, but speed leaves fingerprints, especially when someone believes the finish line is already behind them. I sat at the kitchen table of strangers who had become witnesses and listened to my own life being outlined like a case file. My name, my assets, my absence, each fact placed gently, precisely where it belonged. This wasn't a family matter anymore. It was a record. My lawyer asked one last question before hanging up. Did he think you were alone out there? I said yes. She paused, then said quietly, Good. That means he didn't plan for anyone else to be watching. I looked at the compass resting on the table, its needle steady despite everything. Direction hadn't changed, only my role had. I wasn't a victim waiting to be found. I was evidence that hadn't been catalogued yet. A son in mourning. He grieved loudly, just not for me. I didn't see him in person. I didn't need to. My lawyer forwarded me a clip from a local news site. Low resolution, shaky camera. My son standing outside my house, shoulders slumped just enough to look convincing. He wore dark clothes, no tie, the universal costume of loss. He spoke carefully, about tragedy, about shock, about how sudden everything had been. He said, My father was a strong man, and paused, letting his voice catch on command. He thanked people for their support, asked for privacy, promised to honor my legacy. Legacy. The word sat wrong in his mouth. He never mentioned the desert, never mentioned being with me, never mentioned last words because there hadn't been any. What he performed wasn't grief, it was timing. Behind the scenes, he moved faster. More signatures, more calls, more people being told that decisions had to be made while things were still fresh. He framed urgency as responsibility. People believed him. Why wouldn't they? The dead don't object. The missing don't interrupt. I watched the clip twice. Not to punish myself, but to study him. The way he avoided specifics. The way he leaned on phrases instead of facts. The way his eyes kept scanning, checking for approval. He thought this part was over. He thought the hardest moment was behind him. That was the mistake. Because men who rehearse sorrow rarely rehearse consequences. And the more comfortable he became playing the air, the less carefully he guarded the truth. Watching without interfering. Power doesn't rush because it doesn't need to prove it exists. I stayed invisible on purpose. Every instinct told me to step in, to stop the performance, to say my name out loud, and watch the room change. But instinct is loud, and loud things scare evidence away. So I did the opposite. I waited. From a borrowed room and borrowed time, I watched my son settle into a life he believed was finally his. Meetings were scheduled. Decisions were announced. People spoke about continuity and moving forward, as if momentum itself were proof of legitimacy. No one questioned him yet. That was expected. Grief creates fog. Fog creates permission. My lawyer fed me updates in clean lines, no emotion, no speculation. Accounts touched, emails sent, documents amended, each move logged, each assumption noted. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was building, and builders leave marks. I learned something important during those days. When people believe they've won, they stop listening. They repeat themselves. They trust familiar faces. They sign things without rereading. My son began speaking in my voice, using my phrases, referencing what Dad always wanted. He wore my authority like a coat he'd tried on for years and finally claimed. I didn't interrupt. Silence became my leverage. Because the longer I stayed dead, the more permanent his choices became, and permanent choices can't be explained away as grief. At night, I held the compass and let the needle settle, reminding myself that direction wasn't about speed, it was about patience under pressure. I wasn't gone. I was gathering weight, building the case, piece by piece. Every lie leaves paperwork behind it, just takes patience to collect it. The case didn't come together all at once. It never does. It formed the way solid things form, layer by layer. Pressure applied evenly, no rush to make it impressive. My lawyer called it slow certainty. I called it breathing room. Bank records showed timing that didn't align with grief. Transfers initiated before condolences finished circulating. Temporary authorizations upgraded quietly, then normalized. Each step small enough to ignore, but together they drew a line straight back to intent. Emails were worse, not because of what they said, but because of what they assumed. He wrote as if my absence were permanent, as if the question of my return had already been resolved. Phrases like moving forward without delay and honoring what he would have wanted appeared again and again. Men who think they're safe stop using conditional language. I remembered something from years ago, a lesson learned the hard way. Accidents make people cautious. Plans make them confident. Confidence creates patterns. Patterns create proof. We built timelines. Who signed what? Who approved which decision? Who benefited first? Each document placed beside the next, like stones, forming a path. I didn't speak during most of it. I just watched the shape emerge. This wasn't about punishment. It was about inevitability. The more he settled into control, the harder it would be to claim confusion later. He wasn't guessing. He was committing. And commitment, once documented, doesn't care about apologies. Confidence before collapse. The moment he stopped checking his steps was the moment everything began to fail. Confidence changes a man's posture before it changes his choices. I saw it in the way my son started speaking for the company instead of about it. No qualifiers, no pauses. He didn't ask questions anymore, he issued statements. People nodded. That nodding fed him. Power always tastes sweetest right before it turns bitter. He expanded his circle, but not his caution. New advisors, old friends, people who liked the sound of certainty more than the weight of truth. He trusted them because they trusted him, and trust, when earned too easily, is a liability. He signed documents faster now, approved expenses without second reviews, let deadlines replace diligence. Grief had been his shield. Momentum became his excuse. From where I watched, the cracks were obvious. Dates that didn't line up, authorizations that overlapped improperly, statements made in public that contradicted records filed in private. My lawyer didn't interrupt him. She let it build. The more confident he grew, the more permanent his choices became. Temporary measures hardened into habits, habits hardened into policy. And policy, once written, stops caring who wrote it. I felt no satisfaction watching him step deeper into it. Only gravity. Because this wasn't about a trap snapping shut. It was about a structure failing under its own assumptions. He believed I was gone. He believed no one would challenge the story. And belief, unchecked, turns into negligence. I held the compass again, felt the needle settle without hesitation. Direction doesn't announce collapse. It simply points and waits. The invitation he didn't expect. I asked him to meet me, and he agreed without hesitation. I didn't call for my number. I didn't send a long message or explain anything. I asked my lawyer to do it cleanly, professionally, like any other appointment he'd grown used to accepting. A meeting, routine, necessary, something about finalizing details and aligning next steps. He replied within minutes. That alone told me everything. Men who are nervous hesitate. Men who think they've won show up early. We chose a neutral place, glass walls, quiet room, nothing dramatic. Somewhere people conducted business, not confrontations. He arrived confident, relaxed, already half smiling like the hardest part of his life was behind him. He didn't ask why I wasn't there yet. He assumed. I watched through the reflection in the glass as he checked his watch, adjusted his jacket, and rehearsed the expression he'd been wearing all week. The one that said responsibility without guilt, control without cruelty. He thought this meeting was a formality, a box to check, another step toward permanence. He had no idea the ground under him was already measured, already marked. already heavy with what he'd put there himself. I didn't feel anger walking toward that room. I felt distance, the kind that comes when a choice has already been made and all that's left is letting someone else see it. I paused just outside the door, hand resting lightly on the handle, not to gather courage, to give him one last moment to believe the story he'd told himself was finished. Seeing a ghost? His face changed before his mind could catch up. I opened the door and stepped into the room without a word. At first, he didn't look up. He was scrolling through his phone, one leg crossed over the other, relaxed in the way only certainty allows. He started to speak some polished sentence about schedules and next steps, then stopped halfway through it. His eyes lifted. The color drained from his face so fast it looked rehearsed in reverse. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again, searching for a word his body refused to supply. For a moment he just stared, like the laws of physics had failed him personally. "Dad?" he finally said. Not loud, not relieved. Afraid. I took a seat across from him, slow and deliberate. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Silence had done enough work already. I watched his hands instead, how they trembled once before he forced them still, how his fingers pressed too hard into the edge of the table. You're supposed to be." He stopped himself. "Dead," was the word he didn't say. I met his eyes and held them, not with anger, with presence, the kind that can't be negotiated with or explained away. He swallowed hard and leaned back, trying to rebuild his posture. Confidence doesn't vanish instantly, it cracks, then collapses in stages. He searched my face for some sign of accusation, some emotional outburst he could work with. I gave him nothing, because this wasn't about shock. This was about proof. And in that moment, before a single document was mentioned, before the law entered the room, he understood one thing with absolute clarity. The story he'd built had just lost its ending. No yelling, just reality. I didn't accuse him, I let the truth do the talking. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask why. Why invites excuses. Facts don't. I slid a thin folder across the table and stopped it with one finger. He stared at it like it might bite. I didn't open it for him. I didn't need to. The weight of it was enough. "You don't have to read it," I said calmly. "You already know what's inside." His eyes flicked to the door, then back to me. He tried to smile, but it came out crooked, unfinished. "Dad, there's been a mistake," he began. Things got confusing after. I raised a hand, not to stop him, to slow the room. "Dates don't get confused," I said. "Signatures don't grieve. Transfers don't happen by accident." He swallowed and leaned forward, lowering his voice as if secrecy could still save him. "I was trying to protect the company," he said. "Someone had to act." I nodded once. "You did act." Repeatedly. Early. Quietly. I tapped the table where the folder rested. "You acted before anyone declared me dead. You acted as if you were certain I wouldn't be back." That landed. His shoulders dropped a fraction. The performance cracked. He opened his mouth again, then closed it. For the first time, he understood that emotion wouldn't help him here. There was nothing to negotiate with. I didn't threaten him. I didn't promise consequences. I just told him the truth. "The law already knows," I said. "I'm just the last one you have to face." The room went still, not tense final, because when reality enters quietly, it doesn't need to shout. Consequences, speak. I didn't punish him. I stepped aside and let the system do what it was built to do. I didn't stay long after that. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been documented. I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked out of the room without looking back. The door closed softly behind me, the way final decisions often do. The law moved next. Not with drama, not with anger, with process. Accounts were frozen pending review. Authority was paused. Questions were asked by people who didn't care about family history or emotional context. They cared about timelines, intent, and signatures that spoke louder than apologies ever could. My son called me that night. Then again the next morning. I didn't answer. Silence had already done enough damage and enough good. What surprised him most wasn't the investigation. It was how little control he had once it began. He tried to explain, to reframe, to soften what he'd done with language about pressure and grief and responsibility. None of it mattered. Systems don't respond to tone. They respond to facts. And the facts were patient. I watched from a distance as the world corrected itself. Slowly, methodically, the way it does when no one interferes out of mercy or denial. People he'd spoken for stopped returning calls. Meetings were postponed, decisions reversed. The power he'd borrowed evaporated the moment it was questioned. I felt no triumph in it, only relief, because justice doesn't need anger to function. It only needs space. Drawing the final boundary. I didn't want my son back, I wanted my life back. When the calls finally stopped, I understood what silence meant to him now. Not leverage, not strategy, loss. I met with my lawyer one last time to finalize what needed finalizing. Titles clarified. Authority restored where it belonged. Boundaries written into documents instead of conversations. Ink does what emotions can't. It holds. I didn't ask what would happen to him next. I already knew. Consequences don't need commentary. They arrive on their own schedule, carrying only what they were promised. People asked me if I felt relief. I told them the truth. Relief implies something has been returned. Nothing had. I hadn't regained a son. I hadn't recovered trust. I'd only reclaimed ownership of my own name, my work, my direction. And that was enough. I stood in my house again, really stood there this time, and noticed how quiet it felt without pretending. The walls didn't echo. They held. I removed his spare key from the drawer and set it aside. Not angrily, not ceremonially, just precisely where it belonged. Some doors aren't slammed. They're closed carefully, so they don't reopen by accident. I thought about calling him, about saying something final, about offering words that might soften what couldn't be undone. Then I realized something simple and permanent. Closure isn't a conversation. It's a line you don't step back over. The man who wasn't erased. Survival wasn't the victory being seen was. I returned to the desert months later, not to prove anything, not to remember pain, just to stand where I had been left and feel the ground hold me again. The place looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had grown heavier with truth. The wind moved the same way, patient and indifferent, erasing footprints as if they had never mattered. I stood there quietly and let it. I didn't come back for revenge. Revenge is loud. What I did was quieter than that. I lived. I went back to work not to rebuild what had been threatened, but to continue what had been earned. People treated me differently now, more carefully, as if survival had made me sharper around the edges. Maybe it had. I stopped explaining myself. Some stories don't need to be defended. They only need to be finished. I never heard from my son again. Not directly, and that was fine. Some relationships don't end with forgiveness or reconciliation. They end with boundaries that finally hold. I still carry the compass. Not because I'm afraid of getting lost, but because it reminds me that direction doesn't come from people who walk away from you. It comes from choosing where you stand after they do. If you've ever felt erased by someone who should have protected you, if you've ever been written off before you were finished, know this. You don't need to shout to come back. You don't need to punish to reclaim your place. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is remain standing long enough for the truth to arrive without you. And when it does, be there. If this story stayed with you, share where you're listening from and what it reminded you of. There are more stories like this waiting, and some lessons only arrive when we're quiet enough to hear them.